So, welcome and thank you very much for having us. So we're going to chat a little bit about corporate rejuvenation. And I think the interesting part about this panel is that there are the 4 companies we work for, or we founded, or we consult with, are in a very different stage of their, let's say, life cycle, and are at a very different age. So we have everything from very young. Your current company, Booker Tiger, is like 3 years old now. Airbnb, approximately 9 years. Then we have BDO, 44 years in the current constellation. And probably NZZ Media Group, slightly the oldest with 239 years. So it's going to be interesting to see how different the approaches to in-house innovation are in those companies. Let me get started by asking you guys, on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being nada and not important, and 10 being absolutely terribly important for you in your organization right now, how important is innovating inside your organization and innovating your current business model for you? Let me just start with this then.
Yeah, so I think for me it's kind of a funny question because in a sense that, you know, if we were not an innovative business, there would be no business, in a sense that, you know, it's all we do basically, right? It's like what we do has not been around in this form before we started doing it. So, and we're still, I don't know, 20% done with what we want to achieve. So there's only one way for us, and it's innovation through many means, you know, software engineering and so on and so forth. But so that's, for me, it's kind of all we do. That's why
pretty much sounds like a 10 to me.
It's a bit of a funny question in that sense. So yeah, it's definitely a 10.
It's 10. So it's been built around innovation, and it still is. And I think one key element to any company that wants to stay successful is that you constantly ask questions about, should we just remain or should we change, and iterate constantly, and that's what Airbnb is doing.
Now you expect me to say something, oh, it's not so important.
Not expecting anything, just
no,
you work more with corporate clients that probably are in the later life cycle, like not in the first 2, 3, 4 years.
Right, I think if I answer that for tax audit and consulting, I would say, for everything which is not related to laws, is 10 as well, because it's the blood in our body to create innovation for our clients. I think most of our clients recognize that they have a very, very high pressure on innovating. They get more and more under pressure, and they need to find a way how to deliver it, the innovation culture in the companies. So for them, it should be a 10. Some of them maybe are at 3 or 4.
So the same thing, so NZZ Media Group is, as I said, pretty traditional media enterprise, but it's in a very rapid transformation phase. And I think a lot of us would also say, a lot of in our management board would also say that it's a 10 that drives us. And that's what I was hoping for, actually, because it shows that innovation in every life cycle of a company is interesting. So we thought that we'd dive really deep into kind of hands-on experiences, good or bad experiences that we had, because today we heard a lot of very insightful comments about like theoretical aspects of innovation, and we thought, we chatted a little before, and we all have very diverse experiences of what failed, what attempts failed in innovating inside of our own companies, in starting new ventures, in starting up a new entity inside of the business, closing it down. And we thought that we'd share some of the things that didn't work and some of the things that did work. From your experience, and let's maybe start with Airbnb. You guys are constantly innovating, and innovation means trying out things that just happen to fail, because otherwise you cannot innovate. Can you talk a little about things that didn't work out, and then a little about things that did work out?
I would actually broaden the field of it. Innovation is not just about identifying things that didn't work, rather than the ones that work and improve even there. Because there's been travel, so why should there be another travel player? Because there's been a demand that has not been fulfilled. But one crucial stepstone for us was really to understand what happened after the first listing was crashed and damaged. And that was fundamental for us to understand the trust aspect a lot better in order to come up with insurance, for example, an insurance program that would make sure that hosts would not be left with that damage and with the costs, rather than there's a $1 million guarantee now that everything that is damaged is taken care of by Airbnb. And so that was fundamental to understand for the founders and the management team in order to come up with a creative solution, in order to increase trust in the host community.
Okay.
Well, I mean, you know, in terms of failures, I could give you a host of examples, but I think
let's just pick one.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think for me, it is in any organization. You know, we had, as you said, we talked before. My last company, we started with 3 people, and when I left, we were more than 3,000 people. So, you know, at every step there is certain challenges that you have to master. But I think what is true overall is if you want to have innovation in a company, you need to enable people to be innovative, meaning they need to have access to the tools, to the data, to the resources that they need to get stuff done, because otherwise they get stuck in processes and so on. And so I think a very good example of my old company, Delivery Hero, is that, you know, some of you might know Foodora, where, you know, you can order food and it gets delivered to you by a driver. We tried this before. We called it food taxi, and it, you know, we knew kind of we wanted to do it, but the person that was tasked to do it didn't have the proper, you know, punching power in the organization, didn't have the proper resources, so the whole exercise failed. It never delivered good economics, it didn't grow, so we cut it and we said, this is not working. 2 years later, we had to buy Foodora for more than 100 million euros. So if we would have invested a fraction of this 100 million euros into food taxi, we probably could have pulled it up off ourselves. So I think this is a very tangible example where this didn't happen.
And that's interesting, because you made a good point with saying the person who led it or who was supposed to grow it didn't have the punching power in the organization, and apparently didn't have the innovative power in a way. Let me just stay with this thought a little while. Don't say any names about any of the clients. We don't expect you to name them now, but how many of your clients, where is innovation really the top 1 priority of the management team and the C-level and the CEO? How many do say that it's the number 1 priority and it isn't? And where do you actually believe it? Just a percentage estimate.
Well, I think that would not be serious, because I didn't do any survey on that. But you're exactly on the point. I think everybody here on the panel, but I think talking practically about corporate Austria and traditional companies, most of them are desperately looking for innovation and thoughts how they can innovate. And they do a lot on the saying, they do less in executing with the next line management level, and to do almost nothing with the integration of the whole company. You're talking about leadership and the failure of food taxi with the guy who did it. I think leadership is the first thing, and what we are lacking, and I'm not talking about any of my clients, but in general about corporate Austria, I think we are lacking an entrepreneurial culture among the CEOs. I think we need much more courage, much more creativity, and then what you said, consequence in doing it. And I think that is where corporate Austria is stuck at the moment, and I think we have to deliver it, this power, what we have in every company. I don't think that startups do it so well. I think they just do it, and corporate Austria is stuck.
That's a very interesting point that I also wanted to make. There is, we heard in some talks today, this, you know, slightly, you know, competition thing between startups and the corporate world. Like some people saying, well, you know, startups, there's like this hype going on, and others saying, well, corporate, that doesn't really work. I know that this is probably not going to end well in terms of you guys starting to fight with each other, and I don't want you to fight with each other. But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. So I'm just being the devil's advocate myself against my own argument. One side would be, well, is it really worth it? All the time that we invest in established traditional companies, all the money we invest, all the resources we invest, is this really going to work out? Is this well invested money, or should we rather just go and start some startups? And then the other argument, the counterpart, why should all those startups 99% of them are going to fail anyway. So it's just wasted money. It's not value creating on the long run. Who wants to chime in on one of both, on one of either sides? Pick your side.
Can I briefly start?
Of course.
I have a very, so to your first, you know, we started a business that 7 years later is a publicly listed company worth 6 billion euros. So is it really worth it? And, you know, so can something come out of it? For sure. And, you know, if you look at companies that have been around for tens of years, you know, and if you look at their market cap, they're worth half as much. And so you think this is a fundamental change going on, that you're able to build something like this in a 7-year time frame. And if people don't get that, I think that is, you know, is a massive sort of understanding or leadership problem. Secondly, one thing that a lot of corporate companies think about is like, okay, we have to add some innovation in the form of an incubator. We had a panel here earlier about like incubation and so on. And that feels to me like the new IT department. It's like we do business and then there's like the IT department. And it's a fundamentally flawed thinking. You should think that the way you're doing business today is not the way you're going to do business tomorrow. Hence, you need to invest into, and this is also research in a sense, and not all research is successful either, so not all companies are successful either. So this is sort of like a foundation for your company for the next, you know, 15, 20, 30 years, and that should be the way to think about it, and not like, oh yeah, you know, let's do some innovation and start like an incubator thingy and invest some money. It's like...
Please add something to that, Søren.
You know, I observe, let's take an example, large German multi-corporation, very traditional in Germany and maybe known for trains and things like that. They're desperately buying startup companies in order to get innovation in the company. What happens? Your company, you get the future pilots from the market, the talents who are motivated, who do. So a large corporation buys these startups. So both sides then are frustrated, those who have been working in a traditional business, because everybody says, okay, they're earning more, they're cooler, they are allowed to wear Turnschuhe and, you know, everything. And the startup guys, they're frustrated because they say, "Whoa, I have to fill out a form for traveling, and this is nasty, I go for the next one." So basically you lose what the core of it is, that you gather some talents, that you say, okay, we just do it, we create a business model, we do exactly what you just pointed out. You destroy it by putting in to traditional industry. So the saying, what I say, we have to change dramatically the way how we think about traditional industry, like Zürcher Zeitung is in a transition process. Every company is in a transition process, and I think we just have to do it consequently, changing the culture, and quickly.
But now we're in a bit of a dilemma, I'd say, because you're basically saying it's not going to work inside of the company. We need to, you know, it has to be somewhere else, because inside it's going to be, innovation is going to be killed by, I don't know, forms you fill out, and you're saying don't put it in a lab.
I think we're on the same track. It's like buying startups without having sort of the internal culture first is like taking aspirin. It doesn't make you healthy. It just like, it makes you feel good for the next 4 hours. But that's like, so it all starts, it's top down, you know, like if the top of your company does not want to challenge themselves and challenge their own business through innovation, you can buy 100 companies, it's not going to, and then you're going to have the problem that you described of like, oh, you know, culture clash, after a year, after an earnout, everyone is gone again, and you know, so it needs to be a change in the organization, the way that the company thinks. There are, you know, obviously I think the banks have understood, and it's just going through every industry, and it's quite funny that every industry kind of has the same struggles getting it. This is quite, this I find quite funny in a sense.
So Alex, Airbnb, one could say, is now like basically in adolescence or something of startup life. I don't know how exactly to measure that, but so you might be at a stage where it could happen that, you know, laziness kicks in, some kind of tunnel vision could kick in, where innovation happens elsewhere, where someone else is going to basically disrupt you guys. How do you actively like really hands-on and down to earth, how do you work against that in the organization to prevent that from happening?
Maybe to answer your question and add to what you guys said, we are in a very privileged situation that we have 3 co-founders, and all of them are very visionary on the one side. And I think the second aspect that you don't, like this is very important for running large corporates, is you have an operations that is working on the core idea, and this core idea build a brand value, and it still sells a product, and this needs to be maintained in order to have the money to innovate. So in order to reinvest, you need to have a stabilized core business and then innovate. And the privilege that we have is Brian, Nate, and Joe, they are all very visionary thinkers, but they're also very good in operationalizing stuff. But certainly, as you grow older and more people, you're adding complexity, and you need to be very smart in order to manage that complexity while staying nimble and agile in order to innovate fast and iterate fast.
One point, while I completely agree on the nimbleness and agility, one thing I'd like to challenge you on is the point of you need to have a stable core business when you start innovating, because in theory, that sounds pretty good, but most companies wait till their core business isn't stable anymore. I mean, we don't have to, whether it's Kodak or Nokia or all the other examples we know, the media industry is a terribly good example for that as well. Waited too long to start innovating. Is that really, I mean, is it more than a theoretical idea, this start innovating when you're well off? Do you see that happening in a broad sense in established corporations?
Well, in some companies it happens early on, that you think about a second wave of growth, a third wave of growth, while you're still successfully growing with your core business. In others, you need to have like a wake-up moment when it's already pretty late in the process. I would argue that there were many wake-up moments for many traditional players, and some established, like media industry, they established as portfolio companies, and they bought digital assets, which probably don't add to the brand name itself that formerly stood for large outlets, media outlets, rather than they have a portfolio of very successful digital players right now, and that's their way to position for the future. Does it make them a rock star in media in the future? Probably not, because there's a consolidation happening as well, and there's probably 3 large media players left in the end, but they will have an asset of other industries that will help them to maintain nimble and innovative in the future.
Why did you said you left your last startup, Delivery Hero, when it became pretty big. Why did you leave? Were you afraid that you couldn't innovate there anymore?
No, I think, well, to a certain degree, yes, it meant obviously, you know, as you just described, larger organization means, you know, there needs to be more structure, you need to run your daily business, but it also gives you a lot of freedom, also sort of financial freedom in terms of like what you're able to try out, because you know, if, as you said, if your core business is doing well, you have the resources to actually try other stuff. For me, it was just that the cycle between idea and sort of execution of the idea took too long, and I felt like, you know, also personally, like with my age, I rather than staying there and just like, you know, having a good job in a sense, it would be time to try again in a sense. So I think it's part of it is that things have gotten a bit slower, and that I just wanted to get into the early stage game again.
And do you think, and not necessarily just about your companies, but in general, do you think it's like a law of nature that things have to become slower, have to become, you know, more bureaucratic, that innovation has to slow down in large corporations, or is there like a secret sauce to still make that happen?
I think there's a lot of like organizational things, or that you can. Or organizational ideas that you can apply in order to, you know, maintain a certain level of innovation. You can, you know, you have smaller teams. You don't work in large teams and so on. So a lot of things have been done, and I think there is ways to do that. obviously, with size, there comes there's more complexity, and with more complexity, there's a certain degree of slowdown, if you want. But I think today's company, like your founders, like they grew up in a fast-changing environment already. They grew up using internet and so on. And a lot of like CEOs of large companies today, they have not grown up in this world right now. They're just not aware of like this fast-changing environment, and that's why we get steamrolled by people like your founders and your guys. Because they just grew up in an entirely different system, So I think, but anyway, to answer the question, I think there is a certain degree of complexity, and then slow down if you want, but you can manage it.
There was a funny survey 2 years ago from Stanford University, and they found out that external complexity, so unforeseeable complexity, which hits to companies, causes a lot of internal complexity, and it's more internal complexity than the rise of the external complexity. So in German it's more easy, it's Kompliziertheit and complex.
Yeah.
In English there's no word for it, they don't distinguish it like a lot of other words. May I just
of course.
Correct one thing what you said? Like the typical idea of traditional corporations that they do not innovate until the business is bad. I think that is the effect of the last 2-3 years, that this dramatically changed. That was correct the last 10-20 years, the typical hot pot with a frog inside. But now I think every CEO, and let's put away those CEOs who should not be in the position, but every serious CEO is aware that he has to change the business. The only thing what I really miss is that there is no plan and there's less ideas how to do that. There are some desperate measurements they take, but they do not work out like I described with desperately buying startups.
So how do we change that? So it seems when you say the CEOs are on top with digitization and innovation, which I would challenge in some parts, not all of them are, I'd say. And the mid-management is as well. So what does it lack? How do we kind of fill that gap?
I think the perspective of a CEO, when he looks on his next layer to the second line management, is that they are not able to do that. And I think that assumption is generally wrong. I mean, yes.
You mean the assumption that the mid-management is not able to do?
That the mid-management cannot handle the transformation. And I think one thing they're really missing is that you need some qualification, an outside view on what transformation means, and then they need some integration in changing the company. And you would be surprised how much creative power the next line management has. Yesterday I had a workshop with the second line management, and it was impressive how innovative, how creative, how much out of the box, how much without the box they were able to work. So I think we have to qualify the second line management and then let them work. And I think that there's a lot of creative power in the traditional industry if they are allowed to do so.
So let's talk a bit more about leadership. What does leadership, you mentioned something like delegation and kind of self-empowerment in a way. How important is that?
I agree to both what you said. Mid-management as well as it starts top-down. You can have the visionary CEO that comes up with the vision and ideas and creative thinking on his own, or you have someone taking care of that. But the ultimate necessity is that mid-management needs to be enabled. Especially the larger the company, the more enablement you need for digitalization or innovation, because you need to build it in every heart of your core product, essentially. There are some products which you can build like standalone. It doesn't conflict or interfere with the core product, but especially if you're OEM or if you're in some industry where you're delivering one core product which your entire brand is built on, you'll have to integrate digitalization and innovation into that core product, and you need to have an enablement very much at the top and a lot of degrees of freedom in order to say we build it into the navigational system, we build it into whatever the car makes, for example.
I mean, I think we're all on the right track. It's just there's many parts that go into this. It's also like how performance is managed in companies.
Correct.
You know, the way we report, the way what is defined as successful, and so on. So I think there's a lot of these kind of things that need to change, and they will change gradually. But as we all said, I think it needs to be driven. The buy-in from top down needs to be there 100%, because otherwise you can have as good as a middle management or employees as you want. If they can't do it, like for whatever reason, if they don't have access to the data that they need, any kind of those reasons, then you'll just stifle the attempts. Maybe someone will try it once, then twice, and then if she or he doesn't get through, it's over. And if that sort of happens multiple times in the organization, then you really kill off innovation. So I think it's inconvenient. You know, it also means enablement means I put everyone at 5 p.m. we have an all hands meeting. Everyone in the company knows how much revenue we make, what the target is, how much we're off target. Because why? Because then people start to think. They're like, okay, we're 12% behind plan. The month has 5 working days left. What can I do in order to make up? If they don't know, no one's going to do anything about it.
It seems like a lot of, and I think you're making a very good point, but it seems like a lot of companies, I mean, those are complicated things to change. Those are things that take time.
They're super easy to change.
They take time.
If your CEO says, if she or he says, we're going to do this
super
now,
easy. But if you're somewhere stuck in the middle of the organization, if you're stuck somewhere in the middle of the organization and don't have a CEO,
well, sure.
So this is something, so that's a difficult question. What should someone do who is not the CEO, but wants to drive change in his or her organization?
Should we talk about your NZZ?
Yeah. We don't have a CEO at the moment, so
okay,
I can pretty much do what I want, so that's easy. No, but I mean, innovation, like saying, okay, I can change everything, I'm just gonna change the culture. That sounds easy, but what would you do if you want to do like a hands-on thing? It seems like a lot of corporations don't want to think about the culture change that's necessary, but rather do like a trip to Silicon Valley or put a bubble bath, a visit in the zoo or whatever in the middle of the room. But what are things that could work? Because you said it's super easy. What are things that can work? Hands-on.
I mean, listen, as you said, it really depends where you are in the organization. I happen to be on the top of the organization all the time because it's my own company, so it's a quite convenient situation. But I think, there's just like challenge the status quo. It's like, why are we doing things the way we're doing them? It's like, why am I presenting my product every week why do I have to spend 3 hours preparing a meeting where people are attending that are not interested in the meeting? And then just go ahead and skip the meeting. Just like, do not do the meeting. And then someone at some point will notice, like, why are we not doing the meeting anymore? Because it's pointless. And then you have an entry point. Yeah. It's like, so you have to, if you just do what you're told and just continue doing what other people have been doing, that's not the right way, I think. So just find sort of entry points where you can stick the needle in a little bit. It's like it's a big guerrilla warfare type of thing.
Do you want to add some examples?
Yes. I think what we have to get away, if we're talking about typically traditional organization, I think what we have to get rid of is this bipolarity. Bipolarity means, we are very correct, but we are selling defense weapons in Austria. Ooh, yeah. So this bipolarity, you find a lot stick to rules which nobody needs, which everybody goes around. And I think that you can measure it by now. You can measure how many rules are practically broken in daily process life, and how much people stick to the rules. And you see in a lot of companies they are so desperately over-organized that nobody sticks to the rules. Feels like communism. There's the bright idea of communism, and everybody else does it differently. So this bipolarity, I think we have to get rid of traditional organization, and sometimes you can change it with what you said, with the culture of requesting everything and questioning everything, but sometimes you have to really start with a greenfield new process organization, new organization on top, and disrupt yourself in the traditional business.
Just one tiny additional question. What would be things that, I mean, you talked about the meetings, and I think that was a very, very interesting thought. Are there some things where you say, well, this is something that's a good point to start?
Kill the rules. I think we
All
have
rules.
by far too much rules. It's like what the political party in Austria raised. If you have one new law, just get rid of 2 old laws. I think that would be good for Austria, and basically the same idea for companies. You need principles, yes, but no rules. Communication, information is one key issue to give people the impression that they have the chance to work with you in an empowered way. Yeah.
Okay. Your point, Alex.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's pretty much an internal ecosystem, and the way to influence and nurture your idea up the funnel is pretty difficult if you have a large organization with a lot of revenue turnover whatsoever, and you have an idea that is adding 5 million extra. This won't make a difference on top level. If it's a small company, yes, that's great. If it's a big company, it's great as well, but no one will recognize that. So you need to have the enablement top down again, because otherwise you're nurturing your idea and things starting getting political. That's like where things are slowing down. You're building PowerPoints in order to convince people and so on. So you need the culture in order to listen what employees or customers say, and the freedom, the degrees of freedom in terms of money behind it, decisioning power behind it, in order to make it work.
And give us one example of Airbnb that helps you to keep that innovative spirit, one hands-on thing.
I would actually say what we launched lately is basically built on listening to our community, as I made the example of experiences that we launched in November, and it's prolonging that vision of belong anywhere, which nicely fits into what we are doing anyway. And so this is amplifying it's basically making the experience more meaningful if you travel.
Okay. Thank you so much, and because I know that we're already short on time, thank you for the interesting discussion, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you.